Alright, let's talk about Anime Card Clash. With over 150 cards to collect, each one packed with unique abilities and multiple variations, there's a ton to explore. But here's the thing, not every rare card is actually the best. Some common cards can completely turn the tide of a match if you know how to use them right. So if you're wondering which cards truly shine and which ones might not be worth the hype, you're in the right place. In this video, we're breaking down the ultimate anime card clash card guide and tier list. We'll go over the must-have cards, hidden gems, and even the ones that might look cool but won't do much for your deck. Whether you're a beginner or a seasoned player, this guide will help you build the strongest deck possible. So let's dive in and find out which cards are truly top tier. I'm quickly moving on to the video, and I'm ranking cards in Anime Card Clash. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching. First, let's start with the best support cards. The cards in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Foxcloak, Ninja Vest, Holy Staff, Cursed Ledger, and Substitution Log. Alright, let's get into the thick of it. We're diving deep into the world of support cards in Anime Card Clash today, and trust me, there are some hits and some definite misses. Grab your deck, and let's break down some of the cards that might not make the cut for your winning strategy. We're talking about the cards sitting in the D tier, the ones that, well, might not be your best friends when it comes to boosting your chances in battle. First up, we've got the Foxcloak. Now, don't get me wrong, it sounds cool in theory. When you're below 50% HP, you get a permanent burn effect that deals 5% of the enemy's maximum HP as damage. Pretty neat, right? But here's the kicker. The damage is honestly low, and the chance for it to trigger is pretty mediocre. So, while it sounds powerful on paper, the actual impact in battle isn't all that impressive. You're probably better off looking for something with a more reliable effect. Next, let's chat about the Ninja Vest. It boosts your HP by 10%, which can be helpful in some situations, but compared to other support cards, it's just kind of meh. Sure, HP boost is nice, but other cards can offer more interesting or impactful effects that make this one feel a little bit lackluster. It's a safe pick, but is it really the best option? Probably not. Moving on to the Holy Staff. This card gives you a 20% chance to heal for 15% of your maximum HP after attacking. Again, sounds good, right? A little healing after you land an attack could be a game changer. But here's the issue. The proc chance is super low and the healing effect isn't massive. You're not going to be relying on this to keep your character in the game for the long haul. It's more of a nice to have than a must have. Then we have the Cursed Ledger. Oh boy, this one reduces the HP of the entire enemy party by 2.5% with every other attack. On paper, it seems like it could be a good way to whittle down the enemy's health over time, but in practice, it's just useless. This effect doesn't scale very well and won't really make a dent in tougher battles. You might as well leave this card at the bottom of your deck. Last but not least, we've got the Substitution Log. It gives you a 10% chance to dodge an attack. Sounds like a nice little safety net, but with such a low proc chance, it's not something you can rely on when the heat is on. You'll probably find yourself dodging nothing while the enemy's attacks land hard. Not exactly the kind of support you need when you're trying to keep your team alive. So there you have it, a look at some of the D-tier support cards in Anime Card Clash. While these cards can still serve a purpose in the right situation, they definitely aren't the ones you want to build your deck around. Instead, keep an eye out for cards that have more consistent effects, better chances to trigger, and stronger impact on the battlefield. The cards in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Binding Light, Mystic Spheres, Vase of Greed, Berserk Mode, Hidden Monarch, Dragon Sin Blades, and Music Idol. Alright, let's dive into the world of support cards in Anime Card Clash. Now, we're not talking about the flashy, high-damage heroes that steal the show. Oh no, we're talking about those unsung, behind-the-scenes heroes that can make or break your team. These support cards, while often underestimated, have their moments to shine, and today, I'm going to walk you through some of the C-tier support cards that, while not top tier, still bring something to the table. Let's get into it. First up, we've got Binding Light. This one's a bit tricky. When the supported card gets defeated, it permanently disables your opponent's ability. On paper, that sounds fantastic, right? But here's the catch. It only kicks in after one of your cards bites the dust. So unless you're sacrificing a card strategically, it's pretty situational. Still, if you can plan around it, it can be a game changer for shutting down some of those pesky abilities your opponent has up their sleeve. Next on the list, we've got Mystic Spheres. This one's pretty solid even though it's random. Every time this card enters, you've got a 20% chance to get a bonus to HP, attack, or dodge. It's not game-breaking, but it's a nice little boost that can turn the tide in your favor. The randomness means it's not always reliable, but that's part of the fun with these support cards. They're like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Now, let's talk about Vase of Greed. I love this one because, while it's not a game changer, it's got potential. It gives you a 20% chance to increase the HP and damage of all your allies by 10% after an attack. The real magic happens when you place it on the first or second card in your party. The earlier it activates, the more value it provides to your team over time. Sure, the 20% chance is a bit low, but when it does trigger, you're laughing all the way to victory. Then there's Berserk Mode. Oh, Berserk Mode. Where to start? This one gives a 20% chance to apply a bleed effect, dealing 10% of the enemy's max HP every turn for 3 turns. Sounds pretty good, right? Well, here's the thing. The proc chance is low, and honestly, the damage is a bit underwhelming. Bleed can be cool if you're looking to wear down an opponent over time, but at 10% of their max HP, you'll probably need to stack it with other effects to really make a dent. Hidden Monarch is up next, and it's got a very simple mechanic. It turns 10% of the damage dealt into HP. But that's about it. While the idea of self-healing is nice, the effect is so small that it's barely noticeable in the heat of battle. If you're hoping for a massive recovery, this isn't the card for you. Still, for some very specific team setups, it can provide just enough to keep you hanging in there a little longer. Now, let's talk about Dragon Sin Blades. This one's pretty fun, especially early on. There's a 20% chance that your supported card will attack a second time, dealing 50% of the original damage. Early game, this can be a real game changer, adding a bit of extra punch when you need it most. However, as you progress and the game gets tougher, you'll notice that this extra hit doesn't make as big of a difference. But hey, in the beginning, it can definitely surprise your opponent. And last but certainly not least, we've got Music Idol. Now, Music Idol is something. If the opponent's card is more common than your supported card, their ability gets disabled for 2 turns. Sounds like a cool idea, right? Well, the problem is that it's incredibly situational. The chances of your opponent having a more common card than yours aren't super high, and even when it happens, 2 turns without an ability doesn't exactly win you the game. But it can still be useful in some niche scenarios if you're going for a very specific strategy. So there you have it. These are the C-tier support cards in Anime Card Clash. While they might not be the stars of your deck, they each have their quirky little perks that can turn a match in your favor if you play your cards right. It's all about timing and strategy, and sometimes these cards just need the right setup to shine. What do you think? Any of these cards you swear by, or are you sticking with the A-tier heavy hitters? Let me know in the comments. The cards in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Froststorm Blade, Null Blade, Red Thorn, and Mech Contract. Alright, let's talk about some of the B-tier support cards in Anime Card Clash. Now, we're not saying these cards are bad, but they're definitely not your top pick for every deck. Let's break them down and see what they're really about. First up, we have Froststorm Blade. This card gives you a 20% chance to freeze your opponent after an attack. Now, on paper, it sounds pretty cool, right? I mean, freezing your opponent sounds like a game changer, but here's the catch. It's just a 20% chance. So yeah, it's a bit unreliable. You're really banking on that luck to work out, and if it doesn't, well, it's just another hit with no bonus. Still, it can be useful in the right situations, especially if you're feeling lucky. Then there's Null Blade. When this card enters the field, it disables the opponent's ability for 1 turn. That might sound like a solid strategy in PvP since most players rely on their big flashy abilities to win the match. Null Blade can throw a wrench in that by shutting those down for a turn. It's not a game breaker by any means, but it's a solid way to mess up your opponent's rhythm. If you're up against a deck that's all about those powerful abilities, Null Blade can be your best friend. Next, we've got Red Thorn. This card has a 50% chance to dodge the first 2 attacks when it enters the field, and on top of that, it makes enemies take 15% more damage during those 2 turns. When Red Thorn does its thing, it's actually a huge bonus. Dodging and increasing damage dealt to your enemies, that's a combo that can lead to a free knockout if the stars align. The only downside is that, with a 50% chance, it's a bit hit or miss. But when it works, it really works. And last but not least, we have Mech Contract. This card reduces all incoming damage by 25%. Simple, effective, and perfect for adding some much-needed defense to your deck. It's not flashy, but sometimes you just need to take a few hits and keep your cards alive long enough to set up your next move. It's definitely not a bad choice, especially if you need some solid defensive support. So there you have it. These B-tier support cards aren't exactly game changers, but they can still do some work in the right situations. Whether you're looking for a bit of extra defense, a chance to disable abilities, or just a lucky dodge, they've got your back. The cards in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Sacred Art Uzumaki, Sealed Cube, Heart of the Cards, Fallen Knight, and Beast Contract. Alright, let's dive straight into one of the most exciting parts of Anime Card Clash, support cards. Now, I'm sure you've all been there thinking you've got everything set up perfectly, but you just need that extra bit of oomph to tip the scale. That's where these support cards shine. Some of them can turn the tide of battle in the blink of an eye, while others give you that extra cushion when you're taking hits. So, let's break down some of the best support cards that can seriously make a difference in your deck. First up, we've got Sacred Art Uzumaki. Now this one is an absolute game changer if luck is on your side. When the supporting card attacks, there's a 20% chance it'll hurl an Uzumaki at your opponent, dealing a whopping 200% of its damage. Sounds awesome, right? But here's the catch. Every time this happens, it drains 35% of the current card's HP. So while it's got that potential for some crazy one-shot multi-kills, it definitely requires some careful balancing. You want to be aggressive, but not too reckless with this one. It's a bit of a gamble. Next, let's talk about the Sealed Cube. This card's ability to imprison the opponent for a turn after their first attack is an absolute lifesaver, especially against equally powerful cards. Imagine your opponent is about to land a devastating blow and bam, they're frozen for a whole turn. This gives you a window to either heal up, plan your next move, or unleash a counterattack of your own. If you like playing strategically, this card is definitely a must-have in your arsenal. Now for those of you who love a bit of defense in your deck, Heart of the Cards is a no-brainer. When your HP falls below 50%, this support card kicks in to reduce the damage you take by 40%. It's the ultimate lifesaver against those stronger, more aggressive cards. When you're in a tough spot and you need a breather, this card will keep you from getting totally wiped out. It's all about survival and holding on to that glimmer of hope when the going gets tough. Speaking of holding on to hope, Fallen Knight can really turn the tables when your teammate gets knocked out. When the supported card falls, this ability boosts the remaining ally's HP and damage by 15% of the defeated card's original stats. So, let's say you're using it on a support card like Red Pilot or Forest Sage. If one of them gets defeated, the other gets a powerful boost to keep going strong. This card is especially useful in longer battles or when you're trying to outlast a tough opponent. A little bit of payback for losing a teammate. And finally, we've got Beast Contract. This one's particularly useful in raids and story battles, where every bit of extra damage can make a huge difference. With a 30% chance for your beast to counterattack, dealing damage equal to 20% of the opponent's maximum HP, it's a great way to keep the pressure on. This ability doesn't just help in regular battles, it can absolutely turn the tide in raids, where every bit of damage counts. Whether you're going against a tough boss or trying to push through an epic fight, Beast Contract is your go-to for that little bit of extra firepower. So there you have it, a breakdown of some of the best support cards in Anime Card Clash. Each one has its own unique flair and tactical edge, so depending on your playstyle, there's definitely a support card to match. Whether you're all about the offense, defense, or strategy, these cards will definitely give you the boost you need to rise to the top. The cards in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Galaxy Hero, Slayer Mark, Shinobi Cells, and Limitless. Alright folks, let's talk about the absolute S-tier support cards in Anime Card Clash. The ones that will make you feel like a true hero no matter what mode you're playing. These cards are the real game changers, and if you're lucky enough to pull them, you're about to see your team skyrocket to another level. First up, we've got Galaxy Hero. This card is a powerhouse, especially when you've got 3 or more allies in your party. For each ally, it boosts their maximum HP and damage by 10%. Now, that's a huge deal. Think about it. Not only do your characters get tankier, but they hit harder too. If you're building a solid team and need some support, Galaxy Hero is going to be your best friend. Seriously, this card can turn an average squad into an unstoppable force. Then there's Slayer Mark, and let me tell you, this one's a game saver. It resists the first fatal attack, leaving you with just 1 HP. That's right, 1 HP. This is like the ultimate last-ditch defense, especially when things are looking grim. Whether you're facing off against a tough boss or just want to have a safety net in tough battles, Slayer Mark has your back. You won't be getting one-shotted with this card in play, and that makes all the difference in both PvP and PvE modes. Let's not forget about Shinobi Cells, another insane S-tier card. After you defeat an opponent, you heal for 50% of their maximum HP. If you're good at snowballing, this card is going to keep you in the fight longer than you ever expected. The more opponents you take down, the stronger you get. And that's the kind of momentum that wins games. It's like turning your kills into a healing spree. Very powerful, very satisfying. Lastly, we've got Limitless, the shield that nullifies all damage for one hit. This is especially great in the early game when you're still building up your characters. It gives you that extra breathing room you need to make smarter moves, whether you're playing defensively or setting up for a big offensive play. It's a fantastic way to ensure that your team stays alive long enough to dish out some serious damage. Now let's move on to the best cards for story and raids. The cards in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Promise Child, Blade Rebel, Cat Burglar, Start Gunner, Wild Hunter, Knight of Light, Metal Alchemist, Fire Dragon, Chainsaw Fiend, Space Cowboy, Science King, and Green Bomber. Let's dive straight into some of the most underrated cards in Anime Card Clash. These aren't the ones everyone talks about, but trust me, they still have their moments. If you've been looking for those low-key gems that might just surprise you, you're in the right place. Let's kick things off with Promise Child. I mean, come on, a 30% chance to release a burst of wind that does extra damage and heals you for 10% of your HP. Sounds great in theory, right? But here's the catch, it's unreliable. It's like that friend who promises to bring snacks to the party and then forgets to show up. If you're counting on it, you're in for some disappointment. But hey, when it works, it's a nice little bonus. Next up, Blade Rebel. This card's ability to reduce the opponent's damage by 10% after every attack might sound like a good defensive option, but the truth is, it's kind of like putting a band-aid on a broken leg. That 10% doesn't really do much to tip the scales, especially when you're facing off against some heavy hitters. It's like trying to stop a flood with a bucket. It's just not cutting it. Then we've got the Cat Burglar, which brings a 25% chance to summon a Thunderbolt that disables your opponent's skill for the rest of the fight. That sounds amazing, right? But here's the thing, it's super situational. If your opponent doesn't rely heavily on skills, this is just a cool party trick. If they do though, it could be a game changer. But again, you're really rolling the dice here. Now, Start Gunner might look a little interesting at first with its 75% damage boost if the card was stunned. The problem is, it's only useful if the card is stunned, which isn't something you can reliably plan for. It's a great backup option, but not something you want to build your strategy around. It's like finding a treasure chest, only to realize you've got to take a hit to open it. Moving on to Wild Hunter, this one's got potential. Every time you attack, you gain a charge that boosts your damage and HP by 10%, stacking up to 3 charges. It's pretty good if you can keep this card alive for a few turns, but in a fast-paced fight, that can be hard to pull off. You're looking at a card that can snowball if left unchecked, but that's a big if. Let's talk about Knight of Light, shall we? A 20% chance to blind an enemy for 1 turn, making them miss their attack. Sounds great, except that 20% is not the most reliable. It's like flipping a coin and hoping for heads every time. The blind effect could be clutch, but if it doesn't happen, you're left with a card that doesn't do much else. Then there's Metal Alchemist, which has a 30% chance to deflect an opponent's attack back at them, dealing 12% of the original damage. I mean, it's a cool concept, but in practice, that 30% chance feels way too low to really rely on. Plus, 12% damage return is more of a mosquito bite than a full-on attack. It's just not enough to turn the tide of battle. Lastly, let's touch on Fire Dragon, a 10% chance to burn the opponent's entire party for 2 turns. Dealing damage equal to 5% of their maximum HP each turn sounds pretty cool, right? But once again, that 10% chance is so low that it hardly ever triggers. When it does though, it can be a nice little burn on your opponent. But don't hold your breath waiting for it to happen. So yeah, these cards might not be the absolute best out there, but they have their moments. If you like to take risks and try out some of the more niche abilities, they're definitely worth experimenting with. Who knows? Maybe one of them will be the surprise MVP of your next match. The cards in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, White Ghoul, Snake Hashira,
Golden Wind, Ripple Knight, Deathlog, Thunder Flash, Prideful Prince, Shadow Summoner, Water Hashira, Black Demon, and Golden King. Alright, let's dive into the wild world of Anime Card Clash. Now, we all know the excitement of pulling off insane combos and flexing your deck, but today we're talking about some of the cards that might not always make the cut, and why they're chilling down in the C tier. They're not bad, just not exactly top tier material, you know? Take White Ghoul, for example. Sure, after attacking, it marks the field and deals a little bit of damage. 10% of the opponent's max HP to be exact, whenever they enter. Sounds cool, right? Well, not really. When you're fighting just one card in modes like PvP, this ability barely does anything. It's like setting a trap in an empty room. It's not going to do much unless you've got multiple opponents. Then there's Snake Hashira. This card has a 20% chance to dodge an attack every turn. But let's be real, only a 20% chance? It's like flipping a coin and hoping it lands on heads. Sure, it might work, but with nothing else going on, it doesn't make a big impact. If you're looking for consistency in your defenses, you're probably better off elsewhere. Golden Wind is a little better, especially if you've been playing a while. It heals 15% of its max HP after each attack. That's a decent amount of healing, and it can really help you stay in the game. But compared to other cards that can heal more or offer additional benefits, it's just kind of average, solid, but not game-changing. Now let's talk Ripple Knight. It heals for 10% of the damage it deals. Sounds cool, right? But when you break it down, that's a pretty insignificant amount of healing. Sure, it might keep you in the fight a bit longer, but you probably won't be writing home about it. There are other cards that offer a lot more bang for your buck. Then we've got Deathlog. This one's interesting. It defeats the opponent instantly after 3 successful attacks. In PvP, it can be a decent finisher if you set it up right. But if you're up against NPCs, it's pretty useless. It's like bringing a sword to a water balloon fight. Not exactly practical, is it? On the Thunder Flash front, we've got a 30% chance to summon a lightning bolt that boosts your damage by 30% on the next turn. Now, that sounds pretty good in theory, but the average damage boost ends up being around 10%. So, it's kind of like finding a penny when you were hoping for a treasure chest. Not terrible, but definitely not worth writing home about. Prideful Prince gets a little more interesting with a 20% chance to pierce through the first enemy and deal 50% damage to the next one. In PvP and in modes like the Infinite Tower, it's a decent strategy to soften up enemies, but it's not guaranteed, and that's where it starts to lose some appeal. Last up, Shadow Summoner. It has a 15% chance to strike with a dark aura that does 5x damage. Sounds epic, right? Well, with such a low proc chance, you might find yourself waiting forever for that big hit. But if it does land, it could potentially one-shot an opponent. It's a high-risk, high-reward card that can be a game changer when the stars align. So there you have it. The C-tier cards in Anime Card Clash might not always make the cut, but they each have their niche. They might not be top tier, but in the right scenario, they can still surprise you. Would you use them in your deck? Maybe. Would you build a whole strategy around them? Probably not. But that's the beauty of this game. Every card has a role, even if it's a small one. The cards in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Sacred Ronin, Awakened Wild Hunter, Titania, Psycho Stalker, Surgeon of Death, Homeroom Teacher, Musclehead, Black Swordsman, Crowmaster, and Light Admiral. Alright, let's dive into some of the coolest and most strategic cards you can use in Anime Card Clash. Especially if you're all about maximizing your performance in story and raid modes. We're talking about cards that bring both power and strategy to the table, giving you that edge you need to push through tough battles. First up, let's talk about Sacred Ronin. This card is like the ultimate survivor. Imagine taking a fatal blow, and instead of going down, you're left with just 1 HP. That's one thing, but here's the kicker. It also gives you a free S-tier support card effect. It's like your safety net and offensive power wrapped up into one. Definitely a must-have for those clutch moments when you need that last-minute comeback. Next, we have Awakened Wild Hunter. Now, this card might not have all the flashy abilities, but it packs a punch when it matters. It weakens your opponent, so the next attack you land deals a whopping 50% more damage. This card is super reliable against cards that are on par with yours in terms of strength. If you want to stack up that damage and tip the scales in your favor, this one's a solid pick. On the other hand, Titania is your go-to if you need to block some serious damage. She blocks attacks that deal less than 25% of your maximum HP, which is incredible against those weaker cards that are trying to chip away at you. Combine her with damage reduction effects, and you've got yourself a solid defensive wall. But if your opponent has some heavy hitters, she's not going to be as effective, so keep that in mind. Psycho Stalker brings a unique skill set to the table with a 25% chance to dodge an attack and counterattack, dealing 30% of this card's damage. It's not a guaranteed hit, but that dodge can be a game changer, especially if you've got the right setup. The downside, the counterattack damage is a bit low, so it's all about the dodges rather than raw power. But hey, sometimes dodging is the best defense, right? Then we've got the Surgeon of Death. This card's ability to grab your opponent's heart and reduce their attack by 10% each turn is perfect for long-term battles, like in raids and story mode. The gradual debuffing of your opponent's attack puts you in a great position to wear them down over time. It's less about brute force and more about strategy, slowly whittling down their power. Now, Homeroom Teacher enters the battlefield in Rage mode, boosting both her damage and HP by 20%. She's all about that consistent power boost, giving you a steady advantage. You won't get any wild, game-changing effects, but she's solid, and when you're in those drawn-out fights, having that extra bit of strength can really make all the difference. Let's not forget Musclehead. This guy's the ultimate raid card, dealing damage equal to 12% of your opponent's maximum HP right off the bat. It's perfect when you need a quick hit to weaken an opponent early on in raids or story. Sure, it's not going to win the battle by itself, but it's a great starting point to get that damage rolling. And lastly, we have the Black Swordsman. This card is all about follow-up attacks, dealing damage equal to 20% of the opponent's maximum HP. But here's the catch. It doesn't work on NPCs, which makes it super effective in PvP. In the right scenario, this guy can hit like a truck and completely turn the tide of a fight. Unfortunately, if you're facing off against raids, Infinite Tower, or NPCs, he's kind of a dud. So, nowhere to use him. So, there you have it. Some of the best story and raid cards in Anime Card Clash. Each one brings something unique to the table, whether it's survival, damage, or strategic debuffs. It's all about knowing when and where to play them, and with the right combos, you'll be able to outsmart your opponents every time. The cards in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Pale Demon Lord, Copy Ninja, Crimson Vampire, Lost Hunter, Lunar Angel, The Irregular, Bamboo Demon, Unstoppable Fist, Blood Fiend, and Six-Eyed Slayer. Let's dive into some of the absolute beasts of Anime Card Clash, cards that absolutely dominate in both story and raid content. These characters don't just play the game, they change the game. So grab your favorite snack, and let's talk about these top-tier monsters. First up, the Pale Demon Lord. This card is a monster when it comes to snowballing. Every enemy that steps onto the battlefield gets marked, and for each one, the Pale Demon Lord's attack increases by 20%. It's like a snowball rolling downhill, getting stronger the more enemies it encounters. If you can keep your opponents at bay and let this beast build its power, you'll be unstoppable. Now let's talk about the Copy Ninja. Here's the thing, this card's all about that chance. And what a chance it is. There's a 25% shot it'll reflect an enemy's attack, dealing damage to their entire party. We're talking 25% of their max HP. This is perfect in PvP, where it can totally flip the script on your enemies. But heads up, this doesn't do anything in raids or story, so it's a bit of a one-trick pony. But when it works big time. Next, we have the Crimson Vampire, and she's as spooky as she sounds. She has a 50% chance to revive back to full HP after being defeated, and trust me, this is one of those abilities that makes a real difference. The ability only triggers once, but if it does, it could be the game changer you need to turn the tide. It's like getting a second chance at life, literally. Then there's Lost Hunter, who brings a nice little twist to the game with a 30% chance to attack twice. Imagine landing one hit, but then, boom, another one out of nowhere. If you're aiming for that one-shot potential, this card's definitely got your back. It's a fun card to use when you're feeling a little cheeky, trying to land some big damage. Now, Lunar Angel brings the pain in a different way. She has a 25% chance to deal bonus damage that's equal to 75% of her own HP. That's a massive damage boost. And when it procs, you can watch the opponent's health bar drop like a rock. It's not consistent, but when it hits, it hurts. Speaking of hitting hard, let's talk about the irregular. This card becomes a powerhouse after taking down an opponent, gaining 25% more damage and HP. So, if you can get a few kills in early on, this card can start snowballing and become absolutely terrifying. It's all about momentum with the irregular. Take one out, and it's just a matter of time before they're all falling like dominoes. Now for a raid favorite, the Bamboo Demon. This one's a raid monster, no question. When this card hits the field, it scatters blood on the floor, which then explodes after 2 turns, dealing 20% of the opponent's maximum HP. That ticking time bomb effect is great for chipping away at those raid bosses, making it incredibly useful in both story and raids. You'll want this card when you're up against tough opponents. And finally, we have Unstoppable Fist, and it's just as intense as it sounds. This card gains 25% more damage on entry for the first 3 attacks. It's a quick burst of power that can give you the edge in those early turns, especially if you're trying to set the tempo of a fight. It's all about that initial damage boost, and if you use it right, you can dominate the early game before your opponent has a chance to catch up. There you have it, some of the best cards to use in both raids and story content. Whether you're looking for consistent damage, snowball potential, or a little bit of chaos, these cards can handle it all. The trick is knowing when to use each one and how to maximize their strengths. So, which one's your favorite? The cards in this tier are in order from top left to bottom right. Deranger Assassin, Crimson Eyes, Starfist, Half-Demon Swordsman, Golden Vampire, Dark Avenger, and Peaceful Swordsman. Alright, let's get into the juicy stuff. We're talking about the top tier cards from Anime Card Clash, the ones that will absolutely flip the battlefield in your favor. I'm about to drop some knowledge on you that'll help you dominate in raids and PvP, so buckle up. First up, we've got Deranger Assassin. Oh man, this one is a beast. She attacks twice in a row, and while it sounds super powerful, there's a catch. She takes 20% of her max HP as damage every turn. But don't let that scare you off. The double attack makes her incredibly strong against weaker cards, and you can potentially take them down in one go. So, if you can handle the risk, she's definitely one of the best for quick eliminations. Next is Crimson Eyes. This card is a total game changer when she enters the battlefield because she stuns the opponent for 1 turn. 1 turn might not sound like much, but that's enough for you to land a free hit before they even get a chance to move. Imagine setting up a massive attack right out of the gate with 0 resistance. Pretty sweet, right? Let's talk about Starfist. Now this one's a little unpredictable, but oh, when the ability procs Minikis, it's like a gift from the gods. It gives you a 50% chance to attack again, but each subsequent attack has a 10% lower chance to land. It's a bit of a gamble, but when that second, third, or even fourth attack comes through, it can really overwhelm your opponents. If you love that rush of unpredictability, this card is perfect for you. Then there's Half-Demon Swordsman, a card that thrives on luck. With a 30% chance to absorb the opponent's attack, this card can turn the tide in your favor. The catch? Every absorbed attack boosts the swordsman's damage by 15%. So, if you're on a streak of good luck, you can rack up some seriously high damage. But of course, it's all about the gamble. Now, we can't forget Golden Vampire. This card has a 20% chance to freeze time, skipping the opponent's next 2 turns. This is huge because you essentially get 2 free turns where the enemy can't do anything. The odds may not seem great, but when it works, it's incredibly satisfying to watch your opponent just sit there while you stack damage. Let's not leave out Dark Avenger, who applies 2 turns of Black Flames to an opponent. This flame's damage is equal to 10% of their max HP, and it can't stack. While it's pretty solid for PvP, it's not as effective against NPCs. But if you're up against a human opponent, the damage adds up quickly, especially if they don't have a way to heal or negate it. And lastly, Peaceful Swordsman. He's got a 60% chance to unleash 5 additional attacks, each one dealing 10% damage. The math here is simple. The more hits, the more damage. It's a solid damage boost, and although it's not as flashy as some other cards, it can definitely get the job done. If you like reliable results and consistency, this card is a great pick. So, there you have it. Some of the best cards in Anime Card Clash that can turn the tide of battle in your favor. Whether you're a fan of high-risk, high-reward strategies, or prefer steady, consistent damage, there's a top-tier card here for you. Which one's your favorite? Let me know in the comments.
The cards in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Ice Dragon, Masked Emperor, Straw Hat, and Diamond Warrior. Alright, buckle up because today we're diving into some of the absolute powerhouse cards in Anime Card Clash. If you're looking to crush those raids or breeze through the story mode, these S+ tier cards will make all the difference. These aren't your average cards, folks. We're talking about the kind of cards that can freeze your opponent in their tracks, make them damage themselves, or even give you a shield at the perfect time. Let's jump into it. First up, we've got the Ice Dragon. This card is a total beast when it comes to controlling the flow of battle. Not only does it apply a permanent frost effect on your opponent, but every single turn, there's a 50% chance that the opponent will be frozen for one whole turn. Imagine having that kind of power on your side during a raid or a tough story mission. Every time the enemy tries to attack, they might just end up standing still instead. That's some serious control. Then, we have Masked Emperor. This card is like a silent assassin. After each attack, it forces the opponent to damage themselves for 20% of their current HP. It's insane, right? The best part is, this works wonders against high HP cards that would usually be a nightmare to deal with. In raids where some enemies have massive health pools, the Masked Emperor's ability shines, slowly chipping away at their health with every hit. It's a game changer for sure. Next is the Straw Hat card, which is all about making your opponent's life miserable from the start. At the very beginning of its turn, it reduces the enemy's HP by a solid 15%. This ability is so strong, especially in raids and story, where every bit of damage counts. You don't even have to wait for your turn to attack. Your opponent is already getting weaker just by you playing this card. It's the perfect way to kick off a fight with a bang. Lastly, we've got the Diamond Warrior. This card isn't flashy, but it's tough as nails. Every time it loses 20% HP, it gains a shield that lasts one turn. It's a great defense mechanism, especially if you've got a tanky setup. The only catch is that it doesn't stack, so you've got to be careful and strategic with your attacks. But if the Diamond Warrior can avoid being one-shot, it's a beast that will take a lot to bring down, keeping you in the game for longer. So, whether you're raiding with friends or tackling the hardest story missions, these S+ tier cards are the ones you want to have in your deck. They've got everything: control, damage, defense, and that sweet advantage you need to come out on top. In the next video, we will talk about the best cards for Infinite Tower and PvP. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.